There's a storm brewing in the WNBA, and it's centered on one person, Caitlin Clark. In the span of just 1 week, we've witnessed an injury shrouded in mystery, a physical confrontation that sparked league-wide outrage, a teammate publicly calling out the commissioner by name, a suspicious poster snub, political intervention from a U.S. senator, and a team that proved it could win without its biggest star. This isn't just basketball drama anymore. This is institutional dysfunction playing out in real time, and the consequences could reshape the entire league. If you've been following the headlines, you're probably confused about what's actually happening. The official story keeps changing. The league keeps making questionable decisions, and the people closest to Clark are starting to speak out in ways that suggest something deeper is wrong. Welcome to the messiest week in recent WNBA history, where nothing is what it seems and everyone has a different version of the truth. Let's start with the foundation of this entire saga, Caitlin Clark's back. This isn't a simple injury that happened on one specific play. This is a lingering, recurring problem that has haunted Clark since the very beginning of the 2024 WNBA season. And the way the Indiana Fever organization has handled it should concern every basketball fan paying attention. The first signs appeared at the season opener. Clark wasn't in a catastrophic car accident. She wasn't hit with some devastating tackle that left her writhing on the court in agony. Instead, she started experiencing back discomfort that required her to leave the court multiple times just to get adjustments in the locker room. You saw her on the sideline with heating pads and braces, the kind of equipment you pull out when something is chronically bothering you, not acutely injured. Then came May 20th. The Fever faced off against the Chicago Fire and Clark didn't play. The team announced it was a back injury, but here's where the story gets complicated. The absence didn't appear on the injury report the day before. Instead, it looked suspiciously like what's known in professional sports as load management, strategic rest to preserve a player's long-term health. The WNBA, however, doesn't view load management the same way the NBA does. The league has been increasingly aggressive about cracking down on what it perceives as teams manipulating injury reports. The league noticed, the league cared, and the league acted. The WNBA came down on the Fever with an official warning for how they handled Clark's injury report. It wasn't a fine, it was a warning, which in the hierarchy of league punishments sits somewhere between a stern talking to and actual consequences. But the message was clear: don't play games with us about injuries. Don't hide strategic rest behind vague medical terminology. Be transparent. Clark, however, wasn't about to let the narrative be controlled by anyone but herself. She walked into her press conference and went absolutely scorched earth. She didn't deny anything. She didn't make excuses. Instead, she got sarcastic. When asked about the injury report discrepancy, she tersely responded by asking if reporters wanted to know what she had for breakfast too, as part of a detailed timeline of her health decisions. That moment, that single sarcastic response, told you everything you needed to know about how touchy this back situation already was, even months ago. She was frustrated. She was annoyed at the implication that she was somehow gaming the system, and she made it clear that she wasn't going to sit around explaining herself endlessly. That moment should have been a warning sign. It should have told the league, told the media, told everyone watching that this back situation was more complicated and more frustrating than a simple injury. Unfortunately, nobody was paying close enough attention. Fast forward to Wednesday night. The Phoenix Mercury rolled into town to take on the Indiana Fever, and what happened over the next 40 minutes would spark a chain reaction of controversy that would consume the entire league for the next week. The Fever were fighting hard. Clark was playing well. In just 20 minutes of action, she had racked up 19 points and 8 assists. She was doing what she does best, running the offense, making her teammates better, putting pressure on the defense. The game was tight, competitive, exactly what you want to see in professional basketball. Then came the second quarter. Clark had the ball, she was in motion trying to execute the play, and then she fell. She went down hard on her back, the exact injury she'd been managing all season. As she was falling, she managed to toss the ball to a teammate. It was the kind of instinctive play that shows you're a competitor, even falling, even hurt, trying to keep the offense alive. But something else happened in that moment. Alyssa Thomas, the Phoenix Mercury star, pressed her fist directly into Clark's throat as Clark was going down. It wasn't a basketball play. It wasn't a legitimate defensive movement. It was a fist to the throat of an opponent who was already falling, already vulnerable. The referees saw it, the crowd saw it, everyone watching on television or streaming the game saw it, and the refs did nothing. They let it go. No foul was called. Play continued. Thomas got up and literally stepped over Clark's body, still prone on the court. The internet detonated. Social media exploded. This wasn't a borderline call or a judgment disagreement. This was a clear, obvious, objectively visible fist to the throat, and it went unpunished in real time. Fans were outraged. basketball analysts were baffled. Even neutral observers couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. The next day, the WNBA finally took action, but their action raised just as many questions as it answered. The league retroactively issued Thomas a flagrant 2 foul and suspended her for 1 game for a fist to the throat. Let that sink in. A player throws a punch essentially at another player's neck and the punishment is 1 game. In a 40-game season, that's 2.5% of the season. In the context of a playoff race where every game matters, that's almost meaningless. The internet felt the punishment was a slap on the wrist, and honestly, it's hard to disagree with that assessment. But here's where it got truly strange. You would think that with the WNBA finally taking action against Thomas, the Mercury organization would accept the punishment and move on. You would be wrong. The Phoenix Mercury, coached by Nate Tibbetts, came out and publicly disagreed with the suspension. Tibbetts called the 1-game ban extremely disappointing. He argued that the WNBA hadn't conducted a thorough investigation. He questioned whether the league had truly understood what happened. So now you have a completely inverted situation. One locker room, the Fever and its supporters, thinks the punishment was too lenient. The other locker room, the Mercury, thinks the punishment was too harsh. Both sides are publicly angry with the league. Both sides feel wronged. This isn't supposed to happen in professional sports. Usually you have one side upset and the other side satisfied. Instead, the WNBA managed to upset everyone simultaneously. They split the room. They created the perception that their discipline process is neither consistent nor fair. And they did it all in less than 24 hours. If the Thomas suspension was the match, what came next was the gasoline. Sophie Cunningham, Clark's teammate on the Indiana Fever, decided to do something that almost no one in the WNBA dares to do. She called out the commissioner by name. On her podcast, Show Me Something, Cunningham went on what can only be described as a tear. She publicly criticized WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert for failing to protect Clark. She said this isn't new. She said Clark gets hit, fouled, and physically targeted every single game, and the referees do nothing to protect her. She doubled down on her criticism, suggesting that the league and the referees are deliberately targeting Clark. And when her co-host warned her that she might face a fine for publicly criticizing the commissioner, Cunningham didn't back down. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften her language. She leaned in. That's the kind of loyalty and conviction that doesn't come from casual concern. That's a teammate who has watched something happen repeatedly and can't stay silent anymore. But Cunningham wasn't done. She had more receipts and she wasn't afraid to use them. When the Phoenix Mercury's official social media account posted a meme mocking Clark after the throat incident, Cunningham clapped back immediately. She fired a shot at Phoenix, saying she knows people inside the Mercury organization and that nobody likes them this year. She called them the unfriendliest group. Think about that for a second. Cunningham had spent 6 seasons with Phoenix before joining Indiana. She knows where the bodies are buried, she knows the internal dynamics, she knows who gets along and who doesn't. And she was willing to use that inside knowledge publicly to defend her current teammate. That's not just loyalty. That's a woman with a map and a flashlight ready to drag the Mercury organization if necessary. The self-awareness Cunningham showed was genuinely elite level. She understood exactly how her comments would land. She understood the implications. And she did it anyway. In the midst of all this chaos, the WNBA decided to release a 30-year anniversary poster celebrating the league's biggest stars and most iconic moments. It was meant to be a celebration of the league's history and its future. Instead, it became another flashpoint in the Clark controversy. Because somehow, inexplicably, the most famous basketball player in the country, the player who has been driving viewership, merchandise sales, and fan engagement, was not on the poster. The league chose Sophie Cunningham to represent the Indiana Fever instead of Clark. Fans immediately noticed. It was obviously conspicuous. How do you celebrate 30 years of women's basketball without including the player who has been the subject of more conversation and generated more interest than anyone else? Even Cunningham herself thought it was ridiculous. She said publicly that the poster was a joke, that it should be Caitlin, that it should be Kelsey Mitchell, that it should be Aaliyah Boston. She questioned why random players were on it and not the obvious superstars. With genuine self-awareness, she added, "I'm one of them." She was pointing out her own inclusion while the obvious choices were missing. The narrative that immediately emerged was that the WNBA under Engelbert's leadership was deliberately snubbing Clark. It fit perfectly with everything else that had happened that week. The insufficient punishment for Thomas, the targeting on the court, the league failing to protect its biggest star, and now this, the league literally excluding her from its own celebration of itself. But then Darren Rovell, a sports business analyst with serious credibility, dropped a truth bomb that changed everything. Rovell reported that the reason Caitlin Clark wasn't on the poster wasn't because the WNBA was snubbing her. It was because Caitlin Clark herself wouldn't allow it. In 2024, Clark signed an 8-year, $28 million deal with Nike. As part of that deal, her image and likeness are tightly controlled. She only allows Nike and a select group of other licensees to use her name and number. For everyone else, including, apparently, the WNBA and its official poster makers, they can't legally use her likeness without explicit permission. So the poster maker literally couldn't put her face on the poster. It wasn't a snub, it was a legal restriction. It was Caitlin's lawyers being very, very good at their jobs and protecting their client's most valuable asset, her image. But here's the thing that makes this complicated. Even if Rovell's reporting is accurate, and all indications suggest it is, the WNBA did itself absolutely no favors by not explaining this immediately. Instead of letting the narrative fester and grow, instead of letting fans assume the worst, the league should have been transparent about the legal restrictions. Instead, what we got was a week where the league's biggest star was excluded from the league's own poster with no explanation offered. The league allowed the narrative to grow. The league allowed people to assume the worst. The league allowed the conspiracy theories to flourish. That's not a legal problem, that's a public relations disaster, but the poster snub is just the tip of a much deeper iceberg. There's a narrative that has been building for months, whispered in group chats and Twitter spaces, discussed in league circles with increasing frequency. A few months ago, during negotiations over a new collective bargaining agreement, Nafisa Collier, a veteran WNBA player, alleged that Commissioner Cathy Engelbert had suggested that Caitlin Clark should be grateful for the platform the league provides her. Let that sit for a moment, grateful. That one word carries enormous weight. It suggests that Clark owes something to the league. It suggests that the league is doing her a favor by allowing her to play. It suggests a power dynamic that many fans found deeply offensive. Clark doesn't owe the league gratitude. The league should be grateful for what she's brought to the sport. Since that alleged comment, a growing section of the WNBA fan base has pushed the narrative that Engelbert has been reluctant to fully embrace Clark's rise. They point to the lack of marketing featuring her. They point to the delayed responses to incidents on the court. They point to a pattern of behavior that suggests institutional resistance to Clark's dominance. When you start cataloging all these incidents, the poster snub even if legally justified, the insufficient punishment for Thomas, the failure to protect her from physical play, the alleged comment about gratitude, a pattern emerges. It might not be a conspiracy in the traditional sense, but it starts to look like institutional reluctance to fully support your biggest asset, and then you look at the numbers and the whole thing becomes even more baffling. Caitlin Clark isn't just popular, she's the entire economy. When the Fever beat the Toronto Tempo on June 16th, the game averaged 1 million viewers. That was the biggest audience for a WNBA game on cable or streaming all season. And it wasn't even broadcast on national television. It was available on a streaming platform, yet it still drew 1 million viewers. For context, that's enormous. That's Super Bowl-adjacent numbers for professional women's basketball. That's cultural penetration that you can't manufacture. That's genuine, organic interest in a specific player and a specific team. On the court, the production is there too. Clark is averaging a career-high 21.2 points, 8.2 assists, and 4 rebounds per game. Those are all-star numbers. Those are MVP-caliber numbers, and she's doing it in just 17 games. In all-star voting, she came in second, behind her own teammate Aaliyah Boston. So the fan voting clearly preferred her to almost every other player in the league, yet somehow the league couldn't find space for her on a 30-year anniversary poster. The disconnect is remarkable. Clark is carrying the league in eyeballs. She's driving merchandise sales. She's attracting casual fans who might not otherwise watch women's basketball. She's making the WNBA money, and yet she keeps getting left off the marketing materials. If you're trying to build a sustainable business model around women's basketball and you have a player who is attracting unprecedented attention, you lean into that. You market that. You celebrate that. You do everything in your power to maximize that asset. The WNBA seems to be doing the opposite. The drama got so large, so prominent, and so emblematic of institutional dysfunction that it eventually reached the United States Senate. An actual sitting U.S. senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley, hopped on social media and sounded off about how unfairly Caitlin Clark gets treated by referees. When a sitting senator is live tweeting about the officiating in your sport, you don't have a basketball problem anymore. You have a public relations crisis. You have institutional dysfunction that has become so obvious and so offensive that it's attracting political attention. And it wasn't just the senator. WNBA legend Lisa Leslie chimed in and said the league has to do better. The Fever's own coach, Stephanie White, called Clark's treatment absolutely unacceptable after the Mercury game. A sitting senator, a league legend, a head coach, all saying the same thing: the WNBA isn't protecting this player and the referees aren't officiating fairly. Of course, not everyone agreed with this narrative. Emmanuel Acho, a former NFL player who now works for FS1, came on his Speak Easy podcast and said something that set the internet on fire. Acho argued that the WNBA would be better off without Caitlin Clark. He said she's a bigger distraction than an additive. He suggested that all the drama surrounding her is more negative than positive for the league. The internet predictably erupted. People called it one of the dumbest takes they'd ever heard. Social media mocked the statement. Basketball fans couldn't believe a sports media personality would say something so obviously wrong. But Acho's take revealed something important. The room isn't united. Half the basketball world thinks Clark is being hunted and disrespected by the league. The other half is tired of hearing about her. That divide itself is a problem. But in the middle of all this public chaos, a quieter, more sinister whisper has been growing. It's the most concerning narrative of all because it connects the physical play on the court with Clark's recurring back injury. The theory goes like this: Caitlin Clark is being targeted by WNBA players. Across multiple games, she's been hit, fouled, and physically challenged in ways that seem designed to injure her rather than just play defense. And the cumulative effect of these physical encounters might be contributing to her back problems. Think about it. The human body has a breaking point. It can only absorb so much punishment before something gives. If Clark is getting hit hard every single game, if referees aren't calling fouls to protect her, if there's a culture of physical play directed specifically at her, wouldn't that eventually manifest in a chronic injury? The timeline is murky. The Fever have described her injury as day-to-day without committing to a return date. Some expect she'll return for the July 5th game against the Aces, but the organization hasn't guaranteed anything. Coach Stephanie White has been deliberately vague, stressing that Clark's long-term health and wellness is the most important thing. Reading between the lines, the Fever are scared. They're not going to rush her back. They're not going to risk her future on one road game. They remember last year when she barely played and dealt with injury management all season long. They're not going to gamble with her career, but here's where it gets really interesting and really complicated from a locker room perspective. While Clark was out with the back injury, the Fever went out and absolutely dismantled the Los Angeles Sparks. Indiana won 111-87, a comprehensive victory that showed just how deep this team can be. Kelsey Mitchell had the game of her life, dropping a game-high 26 points. Ty Harris added a season-high 16. 4 different Fever players finished in double figures. The team improved to 11-8 without their franchise player. And this matters because Kelsey Mitchell became the WNBA's first-ever million-dollar player in the offseason. The front office made a major investment in her. She's expected to shoulder more of the playmaking burden. She's expected to be a co-star alongside Clark. So now you have a team that's proven it can win big without its franchise face, right as that face is injured, and right as front office whispers are circulating about potential personnel changes. If you've ever been in a locker room, you know what that creates. It creates uncertainty. It creates the potential for tension. It creates questions about roles and futures and organizational direction. Is Kelsey Mitchell the future? Is Clark still the centerpiece? If the team can win without her, what does that mean for her role going forward? These are the kinds of questions that don't get asked out loud. But they definitely get whispered about in group chats. And speaking of group chat chaos, there's a report swirling that veteran forward Damiris Dantas is heading toward retirement. That would shake up the Fever bench even more in the middle of all this chaos. Losing a veteran presence in the middle of an injury crisis and locker room uncertainty isn't ideal. In its infinite wisdom, or perhaps more accurately, with spectacularly bad timing, the WNBA decided this exact moment to revamp the All-Star format. The league scrapped the traditional captain selection system and brought in two legends as honorary general managers to draft the teams. More than a few fans saw this as a jab at Clark. The announcement came on the very same day that voting results showed Clark had come in second. Coincidence? In this league, that's hard to believe. Whether intentional or not, the timing looked terrible. It looked like the league was changing the rules right after Clark had succeeded under the old rules. It looked like sour grapes. It looked like the league trying to dilute her star power through procedural changes. So here's what we've learned in this single, utterly chaotic week. Caitlin Clark's back is a genuine medical mystery. Her return date is completely up in the air. The WNBA left her off its own anniversary poster, even if there were legal reasons. Her own teammate is publicly dragging the commissioner. A sitting U.S. senator is in the comments. The Fever just proved they can win without her. The organization is dealing with potential retirements and personnel questions. The all-star format has been changed at a suspiciously convenient moment. And half the basketball world is convinced the league is plotting against its biggest star, while the other half thinks everyone is being dramatic. That's not normal, that's institutional dysfunction. That's a league that doesn't seem to know how to handle the most interesting thing that's happened to it in years. The real tea, the thing that's actually brewing beneath the surface of all these individual incidents, is that the gap between how valuable Caitlin Clark is and how the WNBA actually treats her has never looked wider. The league has a massive asset in Clark. She drives viewership. She attracts casual fans. She makes the league money. She's the most interesting player in the sport. And yet the institutional response has been inconsistent, sometimes hostile, definitely confused. This could have been managed. This could have been avoided if the league had been transparent about the poster, if the Thomas punishment had been swift and sufficient, if the referees had been instructed to protect Clark from physical play, if the commissioner hadn't made comments about gratitude, if marketing had centered on Clark instead of marginalizing her. Instead, we got a week of chaos. We got a pattern of decisions that looks less like institutional support and more like institutional resistance. The people closest to Clark, her teammates, her coach, her supporters, are finally not saying it out loud anymore. They're saying it very loudly, and the league is starting to look increasingly indefensible in its handling of its biggest star. Whether this is a deliberate conspiracy or just spectacular institutional mismanagement is almost beside the point. The result is the same. The WNBA's biggest asset is being treated like a problem that needs to be managed rather than a blessing that needs to be celebrated. And in professional sports, that's a recipe for disaster.